everybody, welcome back to my channel. Recently I just finished reading The Secret History by Donna Tartt, but when I was reading, the cover of my book started to like fall apart. Here it is. I eventually tore it apart because I decided that I wanted to learn how to bind it into a hardcover. So here's the finished product. I just finished it this morning and I am going to basically show you guys how I did this and also give some tips and tricks if you wanted to try bookbinding but you were a little intimidated, because this was my first time and I think it turned out really well. So yeah, with that, let's just get on with this video. Okay, the first thing I did was take off the cover of my copy of The Secret History. It was already half off, so that made it a bit easier. And then I'm showing you the photos I chose for my end papers. These are just some paintings that I think match the vibe. I edited them to make them a bit more muted to like match, and then I printed them out on paper. And then I took the measurements of my book. I think this is called the text block, actually, the part without the cover. I took measurements down to the millimeter. I wanted to be really like specific and careful with this. And then I just cut out my end papers really precisely so that I could fold them in half and that they would line up perfectly with my text block. Oh, and then I folded them in half, and I used a bone folder for this. I've just had this forever, but I'm sure you can find them pretty cheap on Amazon, and I'll link one below. Okay, and then once you have your end papers, you have to glue them onto your book. You just want to put a little strip of glue on the end. I used that paper as like a guide, but it didn't really help because I ended up getting glue on the page. So you see with my other page, I just eyeballed it. And then to help it dry, I just sandwiched my book in between two pieces of wood and used clamps on either side to hold it in place because I don't have a book press, but this is what I use and it works fine for me. And then I decided to make my own headbands because I didn't have any and I love the look of headbands on books. So I just took a piece of scrap fabric, rolled the end a little bit, and then used embroidery thread to just sew around and around it. I measured the ends to make sure it was really specific, and to make sure that the thread wouldn't like unravel. And I also used glue on the ends to make sure it didn't unravel as well. And yeah, that's just an easy way to make little headbands for your books. And then once the glue was dry, I took my book out of the press I made and then actually put it back in the press, but made sure that the edge was like sticking out so that I could add all the stuff to it. So there you just saw I added a nice generous layer of glue and glued on my ribbon for the bookmark, and then the headbands I made. Just make sure you know which end is the top and which end is the bottom if you're using a ribbon as a headband. And I used a generous amount of glue, like I said, and then I cut out a piece of scrap fabric to help strengthen the spine. Most people use cheesecloth for this. I didn't have any, I just had the scrap cotton. You just really need any thin fabric, you're not really gonna see it. And I just made sure it was glued down really well and left it in the book press to dry overnight. Okay, and now we're going to work on the hardcover actual cover. So you need chipboard for this. They sell sheets of chipboard for bookbinding, but I actually just used the back of an old sketchbook I had because that's what I had lying around, and I made sure my measurements were really specific. And then I cut out my pieces with my craft knife. I would recommend using a box cutter for this. That would just make everything easier. Oh, and make sure you're using a straight edge. I heard the metal ones work best though, but all I had was this plastic one. And it worked fine. But yeah, it was kind of tedious with this craft knife. But you know, it was fine. I made it work. Once I had my pieces cut out, the edges were kind of rough because I used my craft knife, so I just used some sandpaper to sand it down and make the edges nice and smooth. And then I took some cardstock to make the book hinges, I think that's called, like the hinge gap. I applied a nice layer of glue on my spine first, and then glued it in the middle of that piece of cardstock. Made sure it was pressed down nice. I let it dry, and then I made sure I like creased it really nice with my bone folder. And then that little skinny piece of white is actually foam, and I used it as like a guide to keep the hinge gap the size I wanted. I actually made this too small and redid the hardcover. I actually redid it twice, and this is the first time doing it. But I would recommend using a hinge gap around 9mm, or I think that's like 3/8 of an inch. And then I rolled out my book cloth. I got this off of Amazon, and it had a crease in the middle, which was really annoying, but I was able to iron it out. It was pretty cheap, and you kind of get what you paid for because it was really thin, and I did notice that glue leaked through it a little bit. It wasn't that bad, like it worked. And then I had to glue my chipboard onto the book cloth. So I glued the spine down first and made sure it was creased really nice and well with my bone folder again, and then I glued down the other sides. And then I just trimmed around the edges, leaving a nice gap so that I could fold it over, and then also trim the corners. Don't trim them right up next to the chipboard. You want to leave a couple millimeters of space when you do that. Oh, I also cut slits for when I folded it over. This wasn't really necessary, but I thought it helped a bit. But then again, don't cut all the way to the chipboard. And then I applied a nice layer of glue. Tip, I used thinner Elmer's glue rather than tacky glue for this, and for gluing the book cloth to my cover, because the first time I did this, I used the tacky glue and it left my cover a bit lumpy. So that's one of the reasons why I redid it. Another was the hinge gap that I mentioned that you'll see later. And then I just folded it over. I heard that you always want to do the long ends first and then do the short ends when you're doing this part. I don't really know why, but that's just what I heard. So that's what I'm doing. Okay, and here it is, lovely book. You can see there that the hinge gaps are wider than what we started with. But then I just fit in my book, my text block into the cover, and it looks super nice, and I love it. I'm so proud of myself. And then I liked the brown, but I decided that I wanted it to be green because I think it just matched the aesthetic a bit better, and you know, I just wanted it to be green. So I mixed up a nice emerald green and I watered it down a little bit. You don't want to water it down too much though. And then I painted a nice even coat over my book cloth. And I ended up doing 2 coats, as you'll see. And in the end, it turned out really nice. And don't forget to paint the back too. Here's the second coat I mentioned. Oh, and there's the back that I mentioned. Don't forget to paint the back, and there's the front, and it looks super nice. Okay, and then I made this template for the cover on Procreate on my iPad, and I opened it into the Cricut app and like sized it and whatever and saved it as like a cut file. If you want me to go more in depth on this, I can, but I don't know, you can probably find better tutorials somewhere. An actual tip that I don't show here is I would actually suggest cutting out the cover, the back, and the spine separate and not doing it all at once, because I noticed that the cuts kind of turned out wonky. I don't really know, maybe it was just my Cricut setting, but I actually redid this part, which was annoying. But you know, I wanted my book to be really nice. So that's just a tip. Oh, and then here's my heat transfer vinyl. Make sure you put it on your mat shiny side down, or like nice side down. And don't forget to mirror your image on the Cricut app. when you're using heat transfer vinyl, especially. That's a big tip. Don't forget to do that, because I definitely almost forgot once. But yeah, mirror your image and make sure shiny side is down. Oh my god. And then I cut the pieces to make it a bit easier to weed, and I started weeding, which was really satisfying. I love weeding things. But this was when I realized that the cuts were kind of off, and then I had to redo it, but whatever. You'll see my redone covers here. This was when I had to redo it. And then I placed them on my cover, and lined them up really nice. I spent like probably 30 seconds doing this. I just wanted it to be perfect. Sorry about the glare there, but you know, you can kind of picture what is happening. And then it was time to iron it or heat press it. My mom had this heat press, so that's just what I used. You can also use an iron. And I put a piece of parchment over my cover, and then a folded up piece of fabric under. Ideally, you would do this on an ironing board though. And then I just followed the directions of the heat press. The biggest tips is make sure you're putting enough pressure, and then make sure you know how long you're holding it down. And then, so I just went over my book a couple times, in like increments of like 10 seconds. And then I peeled off the plastic part. A good tip is wait for the book to cool before you do this. You don't want to peel it up when it's still hot, because I did that in one part, and it kind of got messed up. There, it was like already kind of lifting, and I was getting impatient and kept like heat pressing it, and like I just didn't let it cool down enough. And then once the plastic was off, I just went over it one more time with the parchment paper and heat press to really make sure everything stayed down. And yeah, that is how I made my cover. And then I pulled out the Cricut machine one more time, and I made this little decal that says "Live Forever." If you know, you know, if you've read the book. I cut it out again on some more gold vinyl. Again, make sure to mirror it. And then I cut it out, and while it was getting cut, I heat sealed the end of my ribbon bookmark just to make sure it wouldn't fray everywhere. And then I got my little decal here and weeded it and ironed it onto my ribbon. I would suggest testing this, because some ribbons, I feel like they would melt doing this. I'm not really sure. This ribbon didn't melt, but always do a test, just because you never know what's gonna happen when you're doing heat in fabric. So yeah, but I tested it, and I made sure that I could heat transfer onto this ribbon. And yeah, I thought this was a really special touch, and I think it looks really nice. And then the last step was to glue the text block into the hardcover. I put the parchment paper I was using in between the papers to make sure that the glue wouldn't like stick to all the pages. Sorry you can't really see what I'm doing here, but I was basically just making sure it was lined up perfectly. I spent a long time making sure it was lined up nicely. And then again, I used a nice generous amount of glue. I used my tacky glue here, not the Elmer's glue, and made sure it was spread out really nice and evenly. I used a lot of glue. I think I used a bit too much. Don't use too much. And then I stuck it down. For some reason, I don't have footage of this, but you basically just glue both covers on. Don't glue the spine. You need the spine to be not glued. And then I put it back into my little book press here and let it dry overnight. And here is the finished book. I know you guys saw this at the beginning, but of course I wanted to show it off again because I'm really proud, especially for my first time bookbinding, and now I am very excited to keep doing this. I already have a couple books in mind I want to buy next, and some of my friends' birthdays are coming up. They're not huge readers, but they do like some books, so maybe they'll get a special edition from me. Who knows? But yeah, thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you want to see more. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.